And in the back of me, I have Positano, Italy. And I was thinking we're going to be talking a lot about depression. And I thought, what place, if you were to just plot me there, would make me get out of any depression that's possible? And I was thinking, well, that would definitely be Positano. What an amazingly beautiful place. Also, I was there when I was probably like 17, I would guess. And I was just blown away by it at the time. And as I said, I was sort of thinking about what kind of background I should put. And that definitely does make me happy. It's such an incredibly beautiful place. Hi, Pat. So, and also, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Mediterranean diet because it can help with so many different things. The problem is a lot of people don't really quite understand what the Mediterranean diet is. Not that that's going to be a focus of tonight's class, but we'll get into that. And please type in where you're calling, where you're watching from. Sheila is in Silverdale, Washington, and I know Pat's in Texas. And anyway, let's get started. Let me share my screen. Marcia is watching from Arizona. And oh, Pat's in Austin right now. It's a nice place. All right, let me get my screen on here. Sharon's in Fort Worth, Texas. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about lifestyle and mental health. And of course, all of us are going through a whole lot with this COVID craziness. And a lot of us, I believe, are getting a little bit more depressed, or at least feeling down, because either we're trapped at home or whatever the case is. But also, I think there are probably some nutritional factors that are making this sort of feeling a little bit worse now. And so we're going to go through various things that can help. And again, as always, I always say at the very beginning of the lecture that things repeat over and over again. But with each topic, there's some uniqueness. But if you've been following me now for, this is probably like close to the 20th episode that we're on, you know that there are certain things that recur over and over again. And I'll make comments and notes on those as we go through. But I wanted to, just in the very beginning, say that what usually works for one organ system generally tends to work for the entire body, because we're looking at things more from what they call a systems biology approach, which is where it's sort of like thinking about ecology, where the soil affects the growth of the plants and the animals affect the soil, and everything is sort of connected. And the same thing is with our bodies. Every single organ is connected to every other. And I always say that my father, who is a doctor, he did a lot of rheumatology, but was also a family doc for many, many years. When he was training, at the time, you had to become an expert in just about everything, because he delivered babies. He would scrub in during the surgeries of his patients and assist. And, as he's seen medicine progress, we've spoken about this many times, that, the specialist is so narrowly focused that he or she has a very difficult time seeing what's really going on, because they're so focused on their specialty. And in the future, really, we're going to go back to the way it was in the past, which is where doctors had a more holistic view. In other words, they were seeing things from a broader perspective and were able to make really significant changes, or see what changes were happening and how they were integrated or interacting in the body. Before I get to that, actually, I just wanted to, there's this article that I printed out earlier. It's called The Unmapped Chemical Complexity of Our Diet. And I just wanted to just read one thing here, because I think it's relevant to any kind of talk about nutrition, because we tend to think we are somewhat overconfident in some of the studies that we've done. And this sort of shows that we are very, very far away from having a really clear idea of the incredible complexity of fruits and vegetables. And this is basically what it says, and then we'll jump right into the class. But it says, our understanding of diet, how a diet affects health, is limited to 150 nutritional components that are tracked and cataloged. And then it goes on to say that these components represent only a fraction of the more than 26,000 distinct, definable biochemicals present in our food, many of which have documented effects, but remain unquantified in any systemic fashion, which basically means that, yeah, we have a short amount of information on what's going on in some of the food that we have, but that there are literally 26,000 distinct, definable biochemicals that are affecting our health. And we can't understand the complexity of food. That's what's so incredibly remarkable. And the fact that we even have any studies that are helpful is just mind-blowing. And I just printed this out earlier because someone recommended it to me. I haven't had a chance to actually read the entire article. I'll probably mention a little bit of it next time. Just because, when you take a piece of broccoli, for example, yeah, we know that there are a couple things in there that we've spoken about before in other lectures that makes this huge impact on your health and reduces cancer rates and balances certain hormones, actually. And yet there are probably thousands of other chemicals in that piece of broccoli that we haven't even scratched the surface understanding. That, to me, is really, really remarkable. And also gives you pause, or at least inspires some sort of awe of really the remarkable benefits of fruits and vegetables. And how we're not going to be able to duplicate that with a vitamin. As much as I'm going to be mentioning certain vitamins that have been shown to help with depression, nonetheless, you're always going to be able to get more benefit if you really focus on what you're eating and making sure that you're getting rid of all the bad stuff and increasing some of the good stuff. And understanding these 26,000 chemicals, you're never going to be able to get, food in a pill. We're not even close to getting to that point. So, okay, let me get back to my screen and we shall get started. All right, let's see. Looking for, here it is. All right, so let's get started. So tonight, essentially, we're going to be talking about lifestyle and mental health. And I just want to do a time check. And I'm going to be focusing a lot on nutrition more than anything else. But I want to make it clear that we're basically speaking about a whole lot more than nutrition. That you could have a 5-day conference where you go through all the aspects. Tonight, we're going to be brushing just the surface of essentially nutrition and mental health. But before that we do that, it's important to just understand that, when it comes to looking at your situation, you should always look at it from the 5 dimensions of being. So those are, of course, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social/relational. And again, we're going to be focusing mostly on sort of the physical/nutritional aspect, but it's important to understand that when we're looking at mental health, that we take into account these. In other words, if you're trying to become more control over your overall health, and one of those things is really your mental state, your degree of happiness and how you respond to stress, all these things, you need to look at them from these 5 different dimensions. Now the mentals, your thinking and do you retreat into using your mind? Do you overly use your mind? Like for me, as an example, I'm constantly trying to learn. That's sort of something that I love doing. I love reading books and such. And sometimes when I'm taking a break, I'll go read a book, intense, scientific book. And, if I'm spending all too much time in there and not sitting down and relaxing and just closing my eyes, then I could overdo this sort of mental aspect, and it can unbalance, my mental state. Even though I have this predisposition to wanting to continue to learn and expand my scientific and other types of knowledge. Emotional, looking at how balanced you are emotionally, spiritually, how this sort of sense of connection even if you don't believe in God, there's still a spiritual component where the sense of, do you feel connected? Is there ever a sense of awe, beauty, of being moved? And then social, relational, because when this aspect, and we're all dealing with some problems with that these days because of COVID, we are, in our apartments and houses, and sometimes we're maybe stuck with people we don't want to be, from a relational perspective. And we need to look at all of these other things, of course, if we're going to be thinking about, your overall mental state. And I love these two quotes by Viktor Frankl. The first one is, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So from that moment that we get tipped off, or something happens, and our response to that, there is he's saying there's a space, and we can, if, with practice, if you continue to sort of recognize and remind yourself that there's that space can sort of lengthen. It can give you time to be able to choose your reaction. Really, obviously, many of you are familiar with one of his many books called In Search of Meaning. It's probably one of the most recommended books by many people. And then the other quote is, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Which, these two are obviously related. And can we exercise in that? Can we recognize that there's a space? And then can we exercise some freedom of choice in that space? So I mention these only because I don't want to give the impression that I think that your mental state is just a nutritional, related to nutrition. Obviously, there's a whole lot of other factors, but we're going to be speaking now for the rest of the lecture on lifestyle and mental health. So what's the background here? 15% of the population has depression. It's much more common in the elderly, and also not as well recognized or dealt with by physicians either. Only around 1/3 of people start treatment. Many don't take the treatments as they're prescribed. And quite frankly, antidepressants, and when you look at the studies, definitely works for severe depression, but the data for mild to moderate is not so certain. Most people usually state it as the studies are not statistically significant for using antidepressants for mild to moderate depression. Now, that's not to say that they don't work. In fact, I can just say that, of course, there are many patients that I've seen who come in to see me on antidepressants who swear by the fact that they have been beneficial for them. So I'm certainly not recommending that people stop their medications, but when you make a really clear look at the studies, when it comes to mild to moderate depression, the studies are not as convincing as probably one would want them to be. But again, if you're on them and you feel that there's an improvement, obviously, then they're working for you. So let's go through some of the causes. And we can probably spend the entire class on this, but obviously situational issues, dealing with any traumas in the 5 dimensions of being, but certainly grief and loss are definitely going to cause a significant amount of depression. Obviously, neurotransmitters are basically an imbalance of neurotransmitters. They're made from amino acids, and they're what are called cofactors and such that need to be involved in the creation of neurotransmitters, and those need vitamins and minerals. B complex, the whole B complex, the B vitamins, and an optimal balance of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids. We'll spend a little bit more time on that later, but most of you probably know, if you've been watching my class, that basically omega-3s are, most of us know, are like fish oil, but it's also found in like walnuts and flax seeds. And the optimal balance here is, omega-6s are found in cooking oils like sunflower, safflower oil, corn oil, and most of those oils, in addition to being rancid, are overly omega-6, too many omega-6s. And this natural balance of omega-3s to omega-6s, when it's offset, when it used to be like 1 part 3 to 3 or 4 parts 6. And nowadays, with processed foods and the fact that some of these oils are found in so many different products, we're seeing ratios of like 1 part 3 to like 20 to 40 to 60 parts 6. And when that happens, all kinds of things can happen, one of which can track back to the generation of neurotransmitters affecting your overall mood. In addition to the fact that there is this chronic inflammation issue here, that when you have too many omega-6s, this is an overall inflammatory state. And the first step in correcting omega-3s to omega-6s, the ratio, first of all, is, basically to get rid of to get rid of rancid omega-6s. So all those sunflower, safflower, all those seed oils, which is where you're getting an enormous amount of them. And, if you're eating I have seen people who are not eating any seed oils at all, but they have a very high abnormal ratio of omega-3 to omega-6, too many omega-6s. Some of those people were eating an enormous amount of like almond butters and nut butters. And, a handful of nuts, maybe once or twice a day is probably the max that you need. People tend to overeat nuts. But when you're trying to correct the omega-3 to the omega-6 balance, first is to get rid of the rancid oils, the rancid omega-6 fats. So those are the seed oils. The next step is to introduce pure omega-6 fats. You need omega-6 fats. You don't want to get rid of omega-6 fats. And in fact, I've actually had patients who got rid of omega-6s. One patient I'm thinking of in particular who had a terrible case of atopic dermatitis, and he'd seen many, many doctors. I was probably like the 25th doctor or something who he had seen. And it was really a remarkable case, so much so that when his eczema went away and it was nutritionally related, he actually dedicated himself, he was a college student, to becoming a nutritionist. And he is now a nutritionist because of this whole situation. He was a bodybuilder. He was taking enormous amounts of omega-3s, and his ratio, and he hardly had any omega-6s. And he basically had what's essentially an essential fatty acid deficiency. And when we had him drop his omega, sorry, I spelled that wrong. We dropped his omega-3 intake and had him take a little hemp seed oil, which has a really good ratio between 1 to 3 in this case. His eczema, which he had been plagued with for 7 or 8 years and had it as a kid as well, went away within a month. It was really one of the most remarkable things. And I had the fortune to see him over the rest of his college career when he started to study and get into become a registered dietitian. So that was a very gratifying experience. Anyway, I digress. But this, so you get rid of the oils, seed oils, and you want to increase your omega. Generally, some people need to increase the omega-3s. So if you're a vegan, you can have plant-based sources, 2 tablespoons of flaxseed per day, a handful of walnuts. Certainly if you're eating a Mediterranean diet, that's automatically, so generally speaking, automatically associated with a better ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. And there are tests now where they're called omega indexes, and you can find out what is the percent of your red blood cell that has omega-3s in it, this ratio, and you can determine if you have a good ratio. And I probably next week will start to introduce looking at some of these tests. So you can just see that they're available, what they look like, and a lot of these things you can order yourself. And I do truly believe strongly, like more strongly than almost anything I could say, that you need to become your own authority in health, which means that you don't need to wait for your doctor to order an omega index. You can order that on your own. It's there's a test. It's just a finger stick. You can do it home. It has a lancet. You stick it sticks your finger. You put it on a little pad and you mail it in, and they tell you what your omega index is. You can do this on your own. I urge all of you, not necessarily, this particular test, but just the concept that you need to be doing these things on your own. And you can't rely on your regular, conventionally trained doctor to be ordering these things. Yes, maybe in 10 years that this will be standard, and I probably will be, because data continues to roll in and roll in. But until then, you're not going to wait 15 years for it to enter what your conventionally trained doctor is going to do. And I don't have anything wrong. I don't have anything against conventional medicine. I am a conventionally trained medical doctor, and I still do all the treatments that I studied in my specialty training. But the point is that you need to really be in the driver's seat. And honestly, that's one of the main reasons why I actually do this class. I want to create people who are interested in really taking control and ordering these things on their own. So in coming weeks, I'm going to show you some of these tests, what the lab reports look like. I had one that I just got the results of on my own. It's a micronutrient analysis. I want to show you what that looks like, so that maybe you want to get that for yourself and see how you can use it to improve your health and sort of take more control over your health. All right, so we've spoken about that. Next is hormonal imbalances and thyroid disorders can also cause issues. When we went through several weeks ago, we spoke about menopause and andropause. Andropause being sort of the slow decrease in hormones that you see in men. And of course, we spent an entire hour talking about menopause and some of the things that women can do to sort of offset some of the symptoms of that. And all these are on my YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch those. Thyroid can also can be, when that is off, you can have depressive symptoms. Sunlight and vitamin D. Many of you know about seasonal affective disorder, where in the wintertime, people tend to get sad, they get depressed, and then you can buy this sort of light treatment at home. There's something about the light. It's not just vitamin D, by the way, but vitamin D is associated, lower levels of vitamin D are associated with depression. How many times have we spoken about vitamin D throughout this entire series? How many times have we spoken about omega-3s and omega-6s? Many, many, many times. So what we're seeing here is that there's always a relationship that's going on between all of these things. The neurotransmitters and vitamins. Vitamin D is also part of that process. So sunlight is quite important. And, we spoke about light in general several weeks ago, when we talked about circadian rhythms. And just as an example, early morning light is very, very important at setting your circadian rhythm for the entire day. And we learned in that class that when you set that circadian rhythm in such a way that it's working the way it's supposed to be working, everything gets better. And so we all do, the point of that entire class was to take notice more of the cycles that are part of your life. And in the morning, it is important. It's great if you could get outside and get direct sunlight in the morning, because there's certain frequencies of light that happen specifically in the morning that prime our bodies. I mean, we are earth beings. We need to understand that optimal interaction with our environment, it means that we need to respect the natural rhythms of our body, the natural circadian rhythms. And that sunlight in the morning is going to be incredibly important, because inflammation, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, poor sleep actually raises your inflammation. So if you want to get better sleep, you don't mess with light. You get too much light at nighttime, too much blue light, or, that sort of thing, watching screens too much, that's going to affect your sleep, which, is going to affect your emotional state potentially, which is going to raise your inflammation, and you'll have poor sleep. And poor sleep, in addition to raising your inflammation, believe it or not, can actually affect your blood sugar. And I hope you're seeing how one thing is like leading to another thing. And how do you stop that? Well, you take into account everything that we've spoken about, but just in this case, we're talking about sunlight and how sunlight, as well as vitamin D, can basically be helpful in helping depression. Everything interacts with everything else. So we'll get into that in just a moment. We have what's called the gut-brain axis. Some people are now calling it the microbiome gut-brain axis, because if your gut is not functioning properly, you're not going to be absorbing the nutrients that you want. Sorry, I see a question came up. What's the difference between vitamin D and vitamin D3? Well, vitamin D3 is really the more active version. There is a vitamin D2 that some doctors prescribe as a prescription, but there's virtually no reason why you need to take D2 at all. It's a very peculiar thing to me. I guess because it's a prescription, you can write it as a prescription, but you don't need to take. For general health maintenance, you can just buy over-the-counter vitamin D3. So when I speak about vitamin D, I could say vitamin D3, because that's really what we're talking about. But one other thing to note about just looking at the question is, when you're buying D3, you want to buy it in a gel cap and not a dry cap, because you don't absorb nearly as much. So just make sure it's a gel cap. Make sure it's like a liquid, like, a gel, and not sort of a dry pill, because you'll never get that effect. And you can check your own vitamin D level. You don't need to wait for your doctor to do that. Take things into your own hands and order. You can get a kit on Amazon to check vitamin D, or you can go to, there's a franchise now called Any Labs Now, and you can just walk in and tell the lady at the front or the person at the front, I'd like to get a vitamin D level. And she'll say, she'll look it up. A lot of times it's not covered. When you go to these places, generally insurance doesn't cover it, but maybe it's $20, $30, who knows? You pay it, you get it yourself. Or of course you can go to your doctor and say, look, I want to get a vitamin D level checked. You go in and you just sort of ask him. So again, anyone who has any questions, please do type them into the chat box. So getting back to the gut-brain axis, where, if your gut is not healthy, and what causes problems with the gut? Well, and the gut bacteria, processed foods, too much alcohol, emotions and such can affect your gut as well. So many different things. But the point is that keeping track and making sure that your gut microbiome is healthy is really sort of the first step, which basically means eating a wide variety of fibrous plant foods that give you both soluble and insoluble fiber, because these gut bacteria can actually produce neurotransmitters. So that's essentially the case. Someone's asking how much vitamin D3 to take each day. Well, the point, in Canada, which obviously doesn't get as much sun as, say where I live in Florida, they actually recommend people take 2,000 international units a day for cancer prevention, remarkably, because there have been so many studies related to that. So my suggestion is that you get a level checked, and you want it somewhere between 35 and 55 or thereabouts. And I recommend that you take 5,000 international units per day for a couple months, because you have to sort of fill the tank, and then you go back and you check it again and see where you're at. Vitamin D toxicity is very, very rare, and I don't think it's ever been reported at taking it at 5,000 a day. Now, that's what I take. Everyone's going to react a little bit differently, and you cannot rely on sun, because they did a remarkable study that I probably mentioned before, where they looked at Hawaiian surfers who are obviously in the sun a lot, and there was vitamin D deficiency in some of those particular people, because eventually, their bodies are going to create enough melanin that, they're not going to necessarily have the amount of vitamin D that you would think. So while I believe that you do need morning sunlight and periodically some sunlight, the problem, of course, with sunlight is that most of us have forfeited our ability, because we've overdone it as kids, and we're at risk for skin cancer on our faces and on our arms, ears, back of the neck. Is it possible to get a little bit of sun elsewhere during the day? Yeah, it's probably not going to be damaging, but you're not going to do that because you want vitamin D. You're going to want to take vitamin D. It's one of those unusual situations where you really can't rely on sunlight, unfortunately. So getting back to the gut bacteria, you really need to pay attention to that, because when the gut influences the brain more by the day, meaning we're learning more and more every single day about how the gut interacts with the brain, and the brain interacts with the gut. It's truly remarkable what kind of science is coming out in that regard. We've spoken a little bit about chronic inflammation, a little bit, and that can also cause increased depression. In fact, C-reactive protein, which is something, again, that you could order yourself, is a general indicator of inflammation. There's something called high sensitivity C-reactive protein that is associated with heart disease, and CRP in general is a general inflammatory marker. I did probably around the 5th or 6th week, go to YouTube and watch. I did a thing on the 7 lab tests that you should get, and you should take a look at that video. So what raises CRP? Well, so many things. Obviously, certain diseases raise CRP. That's why it's something that we order in medicine to assess autoimmune disease. For example, the CRP is relatively high, of course, with heart disease. High sensitivity C-reactive protein is high, but just poor sleep, processed foods, obesity, pretty much any of those sort of lifestyle things that are not healthy are going to raise CRP. And once CRP is raised, that just means that you have an overall level of inflammation. And we tend to not think about that being associated with depression, but it is. It's associated with so many other things. But of course, tonight we're talking about chronic inflammation. And I came across a really remarkable article that was comparing depression and exhaustion versus obesity in terms of its risk. And I just wanted to briefly go over that because I really thought it was pretty remarkable. So what are some facts about heart disease and depression? Well, before I get into all of these things, I think it's important to realize that throughout history, the heart has obviously always been associated with emotion. It's sort of been the seat of emotion. And perhaps I'd like to just raise the thought that perhaps there's more to those ancient beliefs than we think. Because when you look at all of these things that we're going to discuss, it makes you think twice about how maybe, in fact, there is some really very, very specific link between depressed mood and heart disease. Well, depression often precedes heart disease. Those with coronary artery disease or heart failure are 3 times more likely to have depression. That's incredible. 50% of patients had thought life was not worth living 2 weeks before hospitalization for heart conditions. Depression is prevalent among cardiac disease patients. After cardiac bypass surgery, there is a very well documented depression that takes place that might not have been associated with any sort of depression before and is out of proportion to what you would see from depression after other types of surgeries. Depressed mood and exhaustion is a middle ranking factor for all-cause mortality and cardiovascular disease mortality, meaning that it's like obesity in terms of its risk. It is a middle ranking for, not high ranking, but middle ranking, significant, very, very significant, just depressed mood and exhaustion. Exhaustion, of course, can be associated with so many other things, hormonal issues and inflammation. But it's important to remember that when we're dealing with depressed mood and exhaustion, we tend to just poo-poo it, like it's not something that's going to affect our health. Maybe we do, but we don't have a strong enough appreciation for how great that risk is. So we need to fight depression and exhaustion. And how do you fight exhaustion? Well, you rest and you lead a balanced life. How do you fight the depressed mood? Get your lifestyle in order, go through those 5 dimensions of being, get help, so many other things. Those who are depressed and have a heart attack have a 3 times risk of death than those that are not depressed. That's incredibly remarkable. And I don't know if it was last week. Let me think. Would it have been last week? I don't remember, but I spoke about an organization called the Heart Math Institute. And they look at the amazing connection between the rhythms of the heart and overall health, sense of well-being, how it syncs with the brain in so many different ways, how the heart affects the brain. And I think it's an incredible organization, Heart Math Institute. They also have some training programs for people to learn how to evaluate their stress state based on the rhythms of their heart. This is a very actually well-documented thing called heart rate variability, which is basically sort of the measure of variability of the rhythm between beats. And the more variability there is, the healthier we are. When it's too constrained and there's not variability, there's a greatly increased risk for death, actually. So they have all these training programs, and some of that involves with dealing with emotions, and of course also with the proper amount of rest. And they're really a remarkable organization. It's, when you go there, you almost feel like it's sort of mystical and such, but they have incredible science behind what they do over there. And certainly heart rate variability, which is a very good indicator of sort of how you're doing in terms of stress level, is truly been, has been studied significantly, for sure. So highly recommend that. And I really thought this sort of connection between the heart and depression, and which makes, sense, when we think about the idea of the heart, and health. So I thought that was pretty remarkable. So what can we do? Well, I think you can sort of understand all of these. Obviously, eat healthy. Just go to Italy and eat like they eat by the sea here in Positano, and you'll definitely be healthier, for sure. Statistically shown to reduce the risk of depression when you're eating healthier, which basically means fresh fruits, vegetables, Mediterranean diet with some seafood and olive oil, high in vegetables, high in omega-3 fatty acids as well. Doesn't mean you need to take omega-3 fatty acids. However, there have been multiple studies showing that taking omega-3s in patients has been helpful for depression specifically. And remember now, we spoke about how to get the omega-3 ratio in order, and maybe you check and see if this is something that would be worthwhile for you. Get your index, see how off you are or not, and then decide to take an omega-3. Ideally, you want to have a reason for taking a supplement. You don't want to just take it because you saw a commercial or, oh, it's supposed to be good for your heart. Those are way too general to start taking a supplement. You need to have good reasons why you're taking an omega-3 supplement. Maybe you have high triglycerides, or there's something called the lipoprotein A that can be helped with omega-3s. Maybe you have a low index. You checked it and it's low, and you're having depression and you're at risk for heart disease. In that case, you want to improve your omega-3s. So you can measure these things. You can measure magnesium. Magnesium has also been studied because it's involved in so many different things: enzymes, hormones, neurotransmitters, and most of us are incredibly depleted. And you need to get a special test for that, and it's called an RBC magnesium. Because the magnesium in your blood is generally regulated, because if it goes too far off track, your heart you can have a heart rhythm problem. Magnesium has been known forever to help with heart rhythms. But we know now that our soil is so depleted that everyone's magnesium level is totally, many people's is totally off. And so you get a RBC magnesium, you see if you're deficient, or you start taking magnesium and seeing. In that case, it might be worthwhile because so many people are deficient. Zinc, another one of those same things where it's been found to be helpful in postpartum depression, but also in general depression, I guess you could say. So many people are deficient in zinc. And of course, we've spoken about zinc for its antiviral properties, especially now with COVID's around. And I recommend these days people take zinc, no more than 25 milligrams a day. There are a lot of companies that sell 50 milligrams, and it's too much. You don't want to take a huge dose of zinc. Just 15 to 25 is more than enough. Saffron has actually been shown to have there have been some really interesting studies showing saffron extract. Why not just buy saffron and cook with it and see how that goes? I mean, just adding saffron, finding a recipe, making a paella or something like that. I mean, that would, different flavors, add some spice to your life, or you could try saffron extract. N-acetylcysteine, lipoic acid, vitamin C is needed for the generation of neurotransmitters. Our bodies do not produce vitamin C. We need to take it in, and it's so fundamental to so many processes. So I do recommend people take vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium. All these have been shown to have some effect. N-acetylcysteine particularly has shown to be helpful because it's so prevalent in the brain. And some special notes on bipolar disorder. So there is a theory going around that mitochondrial supporting nutrients are important because no one's really sure exactly what the issue with that is. Sorry, just getting some water. And acetylcysteine is the most studied for this, for bipolar disorder. But recent studies show that it's not all that effective, but there not as impressive as they thought it was going to be, but that some of the studies show somewhere around 6 months that there was some improvement. And EPA, there are two types of fish oil, DHA and EPA. And EPA was shown to be a little bit more effective. So just wanted to throw that in there. So the point is, now that we're sort of winding down, thank you all for your attention tonight. If you have any questions, do let me know. Let me zoom out here. I wanted to impart various things tonight, and that is that that we should not think that just by dealing with we should get the physical issues out of the way first and foremost. Then we need to look at the 5 dimensions of being, understanding really how depression in and of itself is a significant risk factor, as well as exhaustion, and how it's comparable to obesity in its risk, which means that we really need to expend the effort to improve our mood in the best way that we can. And look, it's common sense, isn't it? I mean, it's basically common sense to really think about the issues that we're dealing with here. If you're not healthy and you're not feeling well, it makes sense. The point is, it's a lot more impactful than maybe any of us really understood. And therefore, it's important for all of us to spend our time lifting our mood as much as we can, getting our bodies in the best shape and getting the best fuel that we possibly can. And I hope that with the specific things that we spoke about tonight, that will be something that you'll sort of look forward to making changes on, so that you can feel better and reduce your risk for depression and just be happier. So, and understanding this sort of connection with the heart. So I think that's basically going to cover everything for tonight. Next week, we're actually going to be talking about skin health, how to have glowing skin. And again, you're going to hear various things that are going to sound exactly like what we spoke about tonight in terms of certain suggestions. As always, when we talk about one organ versus another, there's always something in particular that's going to make a little bit of difference. And of course, we'll talk about some topical things that you can put on your skin to have glowing skin. And we'll talk about internally, what can you eat to make your skin optimal? Because I've, of course, my initial postgraduate training, I spent 3 years studying dermatology. And I'm still a board certified dermatologist seeing patients. And one of the things I always get is, what's that magic cream? Why is, maybe they comment on my skin, and the point is that, well, there are some really great topical things, which we'll talk about next week. But I can't tell you how often, because I practiced medicine in very sunny climates. I was in Southern California for many years, and now I'm in South Florida. And even people who have a decent amount of, probably more sun damage than I would want them to have, if they're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, their risk for skin cancer, they just don't have the same amount of skin cancer as other people. And they just look, even their sun damaged skin tends to look different. So I think it's very interesting, because the skin can be sort of the portal to the body. When you really start to see really damaged skin, that can be an indicator of all kinds of problems going on internally. And those things tend to improve when you correct, your fuel and your rest and a whole host. Well, anyway, we'll go through all that in detail next week. And I hope everyone's well. I wish I was in Positano. I'll never forget that trip. It was really incredible. Just an amazing place. And just thinking about it makes me happy, actually. So everyone, have a great night. Thank you all for your attention, and stay well. And I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 8 p.m. As always, thank you so much for your attention and for your questions. Pat's asking about I'll talk about fasting next week as well with the skin for sure. Great. All right. Good night, everyone. Have a great night. Bye-bye.